My name is Michelle Kellner. I am in the investment management industry. I'm a co-founder of an alternative asset management firm called Sandglass Capital, where we invest in emerging markets ex-China, and we do a lot of deep value and event-driven special situations investing, a lot of rescue capital types of situations. And in that role, we are often hiring counsel in various capacities to help us with negotiating with the creditor and things like that. So that's what I do. Maybe some background. Developer was late with delivering the units, like quite late at some point, like almost a year late. Even kind of in those early days, I kind of had a sense that something was awry. They were a Chinese developer, which in and of itself is not an issue. It's just that they were partnering with somebody locally, and that person was rather young and inexperienced. And when I learned that, I started getting kind of, concerned. We did wind up closing on our unit. There were multiple issues, punch list items that we kind of went through, and most of them were, to be fair, in our unit addressed. What happened subsequently is kind of, what ultimately led to me and a small group of homeowners making an initiative to hire counsel. So about 6 months after we purchased our unit, there were a bunch of things that were just delayed. Like a lot of it's a high amenities building with a, indoor, outdoor swimming pool, outdoor spaces, gyms, parking, all kinds of things, right? And so all of these things were being delivered late, and there were issues that were popping up kind of very early in the life of the building. Various leaks and various the HVAC issues that other homeowners were complaining about. And, it's kind of I've never bought a brand new construction condo. It's kind of an interesting situation. You wind up moving in and kind of you meet your neighbors, which you don't always do in New York City, right? A lot of times you don't know your neighbors, but here you meet your neighbors because you're all kind of in it together. You just bought in this building, and you kind of want to build a nice community. That was part of what drew us to it, by the way. Like it's a very high amenities building, and so like you do have the opportunity to build a community that is not just like living in a, Upper East Side co-op or something like that, where nobody knows each other. The developer actually reached out to homeowners in September of that year. This is 2017. We closed in February of 2017. And so that fall, the developer reached out to homeowners asking if there are any remaining kind of punch list items that they need fixed, and were there any issues with the building that needed to be addressed. And all of us sent in kind of our laundry list of complaints. There was an annual meeting where the sponsor's agent, that was like a construction company, presented and kind of took stock of all the various issues that were reported, promising to address them. When in early 2018, it was clear that they had no intention of actually really addressing anything, I started talking to a few homeowner friends that, we became kind of friendly with, and we started talking about, like, what do we do about this? And we had, given that we'd met a bunch of people, I started kind of this effort and put together a group of like 17 families that ultimately hired ALB. And what led us to that is that, the kind of in my initial outreach, one of the friends that I made in the building was somebody who owned down the street and had gone through this exact process. And so he said, I think maybe we should go talk to my counsel and maybe ask him for advice. And when we did that, the gentleman kind of informed us that 95% of New York new construction results ultimately in kind of some type of sponsor legal action. So, okay. And it kind of like made sense, right? At the end of a project, interests diverge. The sponsor wants to get out and the homeowners want them to stay and finish things correctly. And like that's where the tension comes. And so that became very clear to me. And it also became clear to me because of kind of the way that the sponsor was set up, with like home office being in Beijing and agents here on the ground who were kind of for hire and not really worked for the sponsor and didn't really have the incentive to kind of fix the outstanding issues in a robust manner. It became clear to me that we had to do something. And so that's when we put together the initial group. We did an RFP search for like lawyers who could represent us. ALB featured prominently in that search. There were like 3 or 4 groups that we interviewed. When we did an RFP, it really was supposed to be arm's length. And so ALB really came up as kind of the top firm that we wound up hiring. For my part, I kind of continued to try to expand the group. Basically, like I figured out pretty early that this was going to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to really go after them. That our home values would be impacted by, even if my personal apartment was like perfectly fine and there was nothing wrong with it, the fact that there were other units in the building where there were issues and that there were issues in the common areas was going to impact my home value. The first initiative, he kind of told us kind of the pillars of kind of getting success was to, frankly, avoid litigation, which is important because it's a multi-year process, to improve our leverage and negotiating position, right? So what points of leverage do we have? Well, one point would be kind of if we're able to take over the board, right? Well, there wasn't even a board constituted at that time yet. And so one of the things that I undertook was just like an outreach, like a grassroots outreach to everybody in the building to kind of inform them who I was, inform them who like the group is, and try to expand it in lieu of what was ultimately an annual meeting in 2018 where me and another gentleman were elected to the original board where outside representatives were allowed, and then kind of we went from there. What ensued was a 3-year process where we got elected and reelected again to the board, all the while trying to working with Adam to create other points of leverage. The other main point of leverage was to hire an engineer and have an independent assessment of what was wrong with the building. Being on the board was useful. I was able to get access to the sponsor's own engineering report that detailed a bunch of outstanding issues that served as the starting point for our engineer's work. At least it pointed him in the direction of kind of what was wrong. And so that was very, very useful. What was also useful was that the sponsor just was like horribly, horribly managed. And so the people who worked for them in New York, like that team turned over 3 times. They just like, it was just a mess. And the people who left were very disgruntled. And so they would call me afterwards and tell me all the like dirt. So that was helpful. And then the other things that were helpful were just, continuing to just move forward methodically in this process of applying pressure to the sponsor, presenting an engineering report to them when it was ready. All of that culminated in a big meeting with the original group representatives. I was kind of the main one, and then we had a couple other people who were quite active, and then the group expanded from like 17 initially to about 65 families. The meeting here in early March of, it was actually March 3rd of 2020, right before COVID. Right before COVID. We got the sponsor in, their attorneys, Adam, me, and like the other board representative and several people from our group who were kind of actively involved, a couple of developer guys, right? So like to sit down and kind of agree a path. And the path that was agreed to was that the sponsor would engage their engineers to walk through the building and do a joint report with our engineers, agreeing on the issues that are going to be addressed, the costs that would be borne by the sponsor or not borne by the sponsor, that would constitute kind of a settlement agreement. And so that was all, of course, delayed by COVID. What happened in 2021 was actually probably the most interesting. So the sponsor and their team, the second team now, failed to read their own offering plan and failed to understand that once they got their permanent certificate of occupancy, that the resident owners were able to take over the majority of seats on the board. And so we did that, and Adam really helped us with that process because they didn't want to just turn over the board easily. So we spent 2 months essentially in a legal battle. Adam, in his kind of wisdom, engaged very early on because it's a very large building and it's a pretty prominent one on the Brooklyn waterfront. It's 216 units. It's, there are actually some very prominent people who live in the building. And the scope of the issues was very broad-based. There were like big HVAC issues. There were big issues with leaks with a high roof and actually a low roof, the garage roof, which constituted millions of dollars and needed repairs. And so Adam actually engaged the Attorney General in the real estate division for New York. And so with the kind of help of the AG, that was one of the things that ultimately brought sponsor to the table, and because they were not, negotiating with us easily, right? So the AG ultimately was able to put enough pressure on them to have them agree to engage in this joint engineering report and a discussion towards a settlement agreement. What ultimately helped that process was what I mentioned earlier, the ability for us to take over the board and get our own people installed and kind of start moving forward, which helped a lot because all of a sudden our condo fees were used to pay for all of these expenses. But then, the sponsor knew that there was a statute of limitations that was expiring after 5 years. And we knew that we had like one board term to kind of get to a success, right? Because this process had already been going on for like almost 4 years. So we thought we need to kind of boogie and get this, get this done. And so we, kind of raced to the finish line over the past year, ultimately getting to a broad settlement agreement with sponsor. In the interim, we also noticed that in the offering documents, there was a stipulation that, by the way, they had their team, concurrent with when we took over the board, changed again. So this was the third team we were negotiating with. Like, they should have been aligned with us to kind of get the building fixed up. There people weren't able to sell, obviously, their units. Rentals have picked up again, and sales have picked up to some extent, but it's still like an overhang. The fact that there was this now quite well known about sponsor legal action and quite well known structural issues in the building, obviously word gets out, right? It's just like everybody knows about this stuff. The culmination of all this also included getting a garage settlement. So they were supposed to be paying us parking license fees on garage spaces that they were leasing for a garage that was owned by the building that we were paying taxes and utilities on. Adam was very helpful on that also. Adam is a very good strategist. And I think that's kind of his superpower, if you will. I think he knows the law, but he's able to also explain it in a way that's simple to people who are maybe not legal experts. And while I may be very comfortable in getting in the weeds on that, other people are not necessarily, and it's a building with all sorts of personalities and people of various professions in it. Not all, very few lawyers, frankly, right? He also had Rachel heavily involved from pretty much day one, who was awesome, and then Rachel, when she went on maternity leave, she had Courtney, who was also awesome, like fantastic. So Adam not only is kind of, very strong on kind of the high-level strategy for what we're going to do, getting in the weeds when he needs to, and getting involved and using his kind of contact network and levers with the AG and such to kind of make things happen. He also has a great team. I mean, any firm has to have a great team. So, like, Rachel and Courtney were the ones to kind of get deep in the weeds. Adam's like a pretty, no-nonsense guy who just tells it like it is. But some people, you can't do that with. You have to understand how to address them in a way that's going to resonate with them, and that's a real skill, and that takes a lot of self-control. So it's like a very good quality that he has. Won't take no for an answer, exacting, thoughtful, very, very thoughtful, very much able to deal with various personalities. Not sure what the adjective for won't take no for an answer, but very persistent. And I think you have to be very persistent, very diligent, and very exacting to really be successful in this type of endeavor. I mean, I really think it goes back to kind of Adam and his ability to build a great team that can support him and move things forward to the end goal. And our end goal was always to get a settlement agreement, to get one that was large enough to fix all or substantively all of the issues, and we got that. And to do that in the kind of the most efficient manner possible, which was hard because we had 2 years of COVID in the middle of it. But yes, I would recommend Adam unequivocally to any friend who's dealing with a similar situation.